Hello, and welcome back to my series on the King Crimson box sets. Now, if you didn't see part one, I would say definitely check that out, probably before you watch this video, but if you need a refresher, I'm offering a proposed order of purchase for cash-strapped King Crimson fans who are interested in the big box sets. Now, last week I talked a little bit about the purpose of the video and some background about my own biases and knowledge level. I also raved about the Starless box, which certainly is one of my prized possessions and was my recommended starting point. This week I'm going to be covering the next three sets that I'd advise you buy once your wallet has recovered from Starless. As always, I'm Hans from Electric Brain Electric Shadow, a contemporary art rock project. Check us out if you're interested in music which is complex but accessible and emotionally nuanced. We're on Bandcamp, we're on your preferred streaming platform, or you can check out one of the album playlists right here on my own channel on YouTube. Already have those versions, and if you do have surround sound enabled at home. On top of that, while there's not quite as much live material as there is on the 70s boxes, this box still contains maybe 8 or 9 gigs worth. And this lineup of the band is, of course, quite brilliant live. If you're watching this video, I'm going to assume that you probably have heard the album Absent Lovers. And while none of these gigs are quite at the level of that one, that album, I think, does give you an accurate sense of what this lineup was consistently capable of. Now, it's easy to miss, I think, how much live material is actually on here because 5 of those gigs are on DVD, and I don't love having things like that on a DVD personally. I noted before that I listen to most of these sets at work. I don't have a DVD player at my desk at work, so that is a disadvantage, right? And that may seem sacrilegious to some people depending on your sense of an ideal listening environment, but that's how it is for me, just as a matter of managing time. Still though, that live stuff is really fantastic. There is if not a bounty of it, then a decent amount, and I do recognize that putting it on DVD rather than separately pressed CDs, I'm sure did make the set somewhat more affordable. You also get some interesting studio material on this set, including a lost album of studio fragments from In Between Beat and 3 of a Perfect Pair. You know, that album maybe isn't revelatory, but it's still worth checking out. I also personally really liked the Redux tracks, which recontextualize each album. Basically, they're a collage of pieces, what you might, I think the term for it is stems, from different songs blended into one continuous semi-ambient whole, right? So things like a harmony vocal without the lead, right? And that works pretty well at casting a little bit of an unfamiliar light on some stuff that you might have heard a lot of times. So ultimately, you know, this one has a pretty good amount of really amazing live stuff. It has some fascinating studio curios. It has the definitive mixes of 3 of the studio albums, though admittedly 2 of those don't seem to be favorites in the discography. And the list price is actually lower than a lot of the other sets. So, if you've bought Starless at this point, then whenever you save your money up for another set, this is a relatively affordable one that you'll probably have a really excellent time listening to. It's a pretty deep well of very, very good stuff. As far as budget alternatives, you know, Absent Lovers is the cheapest way to get a representation of this era's live capability. And if nothing else, you know, for Christ's sake, if you don't have that, then certainly do. Beyond that, you know, there aren't too many good alternatives here. And this is another one that, for me, I think the pleasure you get out of this is certainly worth the money. Now, the third one I have in the sequence is the Sailor's Tale boxes, which covers the period of kind of constant churn and transition that happened between the collapse of the 69 lineup and the formation of the Moore, Bruford, Wetton lineup. And back in the 90s, when I was first getting into King Crimson, that period seemed to be really quite poorly regarded by everybody but King Crimson diehards, maybe not even so well loved by them. And there was this interesting phenomenon where everyone I knew who liked King Crimson actually kind of had a special fondness for the album Islands, but nobody really quite wanted to admit it because they thought everybody else hated that album. And now it really seems like that album, this era, has really become broadly regarded as a valuable accomplishment in its own right, as opposed to just kind of the thing that happened in between the great stuff. Which is great, because I do love this stuff. I remember being 17 and buying Lizard, expecting it to be just borderline unlistenable, and being really taken aback by how immediately and easily enjoyable I found it. But that's neither here nor there. So as with On and Off the Road, if you don't already have the Wilson mixes, the surround sound mixes, etc., all the kind of ideal full versions of the 3 studio albums from this period, buying this set will get you that. And, it'll, unlike some of the other sets where there's only one album that's covered, you get that for all 3 here. So if you don't already have those versions, once again, this is a really good value proposition. It also includes the expanded version of Earthbound. But it also surprised me, actually, how enjoyable the attached live material was, and how much fairly good-sounding, well-recorded live stuff there is from this period. Fripp, of course, came to regard this lineup as an inadequate vessel for King Crimson. And you can see why he feels that, right? If you read his interviews and his writing, he talks a lot about the need to leave behind established ways of playing. And that's really not happening here, right? Everyone in this band is a stellar instrumentalist, but they're playing in ways which are much more rooted in pre-existing styles. They're not as phenomenally creative and distinctive in the details of their playing the way that some of the later bands were. They do occasionally get into cliches, right? The conventional drum solo is a bit of a plague here. But there's also a really amazing amount of improv and variety built into how they play these songs. Collins, in particular, is always looking for places to put different improvised accents. And, songs like Groon, Formentera Lady, Sailor's Tale, Schizoid Man, every performance of those during this era had large stretches of improv, which are still, if they're not as detail level creative as some of the other eras, are still noisy and skillful and intricate. And, this lineup really can make an almighty racket, and it's damn good fun. So I actually found the live material from this era much more consistently thrilling and enjoyable than I expected going into this set. There's also a smattering of dopey humor that you can't quite imagine in any earlier or later version of King Crimson. So this particular box is easy to underrate, I think. It has a lot of really entertaining live stuff, even if maybe it's not quite in the same rank as some of the other eras. And it gives you a really good value proposition with getting the best versions of some of the studio albums. So my recommendation for 4th in the sequence, if you're buying these on a budget, would be the Heaven and Earth box set. And there are a few things that set this apart from the others. One thing is that there's actually, in this set, a little bit less of a focus on full shows, right? More on kind of curated live albums. There's a 3-disc set called Live Construction, which alternates versions of studio songs with improv from that time, right? And that's actually a pretty good idea because that the curated selection of the improvs makes for a pretty compelling listen, and it breaks up some of the repetition that might otherwise happen. You also get an example of the 2-drummer lineup from 2008, where Belew actually overlaps with Gavin Harrison. Now, that stuff isn't life-changing. You do get the sense there's an idea present which hadn't quite been worked out, but it's an interesting little fluke in the evolution of their live lineups, and it's very good that they included it here. The full gigs that do appear, there are a couple full gigs, and they have live versions of the song Deception of the Thrush, which is a key track from this time that only partly made its way onto Power to Believe. So even if you don't have the sheer amount of live material here that some of the other sets do, what is here is very well curated, very enjoyable, and a good addition. So even if you don't have the sheer amount of live material that some of the other sets do, what is here is very enjoyable and put together in a way which does maybe avoid a little bit of the repetition that could occur if you were listening to 20 dates of this lineup, right? There are certain songs in the set from this time that honestly, I'm not sure would bear up under repetition the way that some of the other older material did. As much as I love the song One Time, for instance, I'm not sure that 20 live versions of One Time would be all that satisfying. So I like how they have sequenced the live material here. If you're trying to fill out the nooks and crannies of your Crimson discography, this also has a few kinds of odds and ends, like the Level 5 mini-album and Happy to Be Happy with What You Have to Be Happy With, both of which are valuable from a completionist standpoint. I also hadn't planned to get Reconstruction of Light, but it was in this set, and I was actually taken aback by how much I enjoyed hearing that version of that album. But the really distinct thing here, of course, is the complete project recordings, which lend more variety to this set than some of the others, although, as electrifying as the project material could be if you were there in person, it is kind of easy to zone out on some of it, honestly. In fact, the project recordings are the only thing in this set that I've never really consumed all of, at least as of this recording. If the booklet is to be believed, then you're in some sense hearing the jams and rehearsals that led to the finished Construction of Light album, which would kind of be a hard sell for any band, I think, even one this great. I do have one minor critique here, which overlaps a bit with my gripe about On and Off the Road, which is that some fairly key stuff is put on DVD. I was really looking forward to having a copy of the Heaven and Earth album by Project X, of the Space Groove album by Project 2, of the Rifle and Fripp Gun album that kind of led off the whole idea of the projects. And while it may not matter to some people that those are on DVD rather than CD, for me it sucks. I don't have an easy way to listen to them at work or in the car or anywhere that you're not attached to a DVD player, right? Now, I'm fine with the project material being on DVD. I can't imagine the space it would take up otherwise. But, the dates of live project material that are on CD here, I would really happily trade those for the Project X album and Space Groove being on CD instead. Not really sure what the rationale was there. So, ultimately I do have some gripes with this set, but it is still a wealth of great stuff. It's very wisely put together in terms of giving you the best representation of this era. It's more than worth the money. And I think it shouldn't give you too much of a sense of repetition or burnout if you're buying it subsequent to the sets that I've already mentioned. As far as budget alternatives, if you're willing to live without the project stuff and the EPs, you could buy the live albums Heavy Construction and Electric, and get a very good representation of this era of Crimson live for about an eighth the price. Throw in a copy of Reconstruction of Light, and you could get really at least the essentials here for much less than you pay for the whole box. All right, so that is it for my overview and proposed buying sequence for the King Crimson box sets. I'll be finishing off in part 3 in a couple weeks. Thank you much, everybody, for your time and attention. Like, comment, subscribe. It really does help me summon the will to keep going. And yeah, thanks for your time, and be sure to check out Electric Brain, Electric Shadow on Bandcamp or your preferred streaming platform.